It was a freezing, stormy night. A poor young woman sat by the fire, trying to keep warm, when suddenly she heard cries for help outside. At first, she didn't want to open the door, but when she saw a man covered in snow and a sick-looking child clinging to his side, her heart couldn't turn them away. She brought them inside, gave them food, and provided shelter from the deadly storm. What she didn't know was that the man wasn't just a random stranger, he was about to change her life forever. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love reading your comments. The remote cabin shuddered under the relentless assault of the winter storm. Snow whipped around the sturdy, aged logs, threatening to bury the small structure in its icy embrace. Inside, Amara, a woman with warm, chestnut-brown skin and a spirit as resilient as the ancient pines outside, clutched a worn fire poker. The power had been out for hours, plunging the cabin into a deepening chill that only the roaring fireplace could temporarily ward off. Her cell phone was useless, a dead weight in her hand, with no signal reaching this isolated haven. It was just her and the howling wilderness. Suddenly, a hesitant knock echoed through the silence, making Amara's heart leap into her throat. Fear, sharp and primal, tightened its grip. Back away from the door, she shouted, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound firm. A man's voice, muffled by the wind and snow, responded, "Please, I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just need shelter for my daughter." Through the frosted glass of the small window, Amara could barely make out the silhouette of a broad-shouldered man hunched over a smaller figure, a child. Her fingers instinctively tightened on the doorknob. Her past had taught her a bitter lesson about trusting strangers, about the ease with which kindness could be exploited. "I don't let strangers into my home," she snapped, "especially not men." There was a pause, a moment of crushing silence broken only by the storm's fury. Then the man's voice returned, lower, laced with raw desperation that pierced through Amara's hardened resolve. "I understand. I wouldn't ask if I had a choice. She's sick. She's freezing. We just need one night out of the storm." Amara hesitated, the image of the shivering child burning into her mind. The cold was already seeping through the cabin's ancient wooden panels. With a protesting groan from the old hinges, she slowly opened the door. Snow instantly swirled inside, chilling her ankles. The man, tall and soaked, stepped forward, allowing her a clearer view of his face, etched with worry, his hair plastered to his forehead. In his arms, a small girl was curled, her face buried in his coat, her tiny body trembling violently. The child coughed, a sharp, painful sound that was the final catalyst. This was a child in need. All her caution and past hurts faded in the face of such vulnerability. "Get inside quickly," Amara muttered, stepping aside. "Thank you," the man said, his voice ragged with relief as he carried the girl inside. Amara shut the door, bolting it securely. "Sit by the fireplace. Don't touch anything else," she instructed, still clutching the fire poker. The man, Julian Thorne, obeyed without question, gently settling his daughter, Isla, onto the old couch. He unzipped his own jacket, wrapping it carefully around the child. Amara watched, her arms crossed, still wary. "Your name?" she demanded. "Julian," he replied, "and this is Isla. She's 6. She has a cough, probably the flu." Amara scoffed. "You're walking a child through a blizzard. That's beyond irresponsible." Julian looked down, brushing wet hair from Isla's forehead. "We had nowhere else to go." A sigh escaped Amara. Her initial anger began to yield to weary empathy. "I have dry towels and instant soup." "That's it," she stated, heading toward the kitchen. He murmured his thanks as she returned. Julian began to gently dry Isla with a towel, his movements practiced, filled with quiet paternal care that struck Amara deeply. "Why are you out here anyway? There's no one for miles." "The storm's been on the news for days," she asked, the question escaping her lips almost involuntarily. Julian looked up, his eyes a dark shade of tired. I was trying to get Isla to her grandmother's house 2 towns over. The roads closed behind us. We got stuck. Then the car died. Amara studied him in the firelight. He looked ordinary, not dangerous, but there was something guarded in his gaze, something unsaid. Yet Isla coughed again, weakly. Amara's resolve solidified. "Chicken noodle it is," she muttered, returning from the kitchen with 2 steaming mugs. She handed Isla's mug directly to her, sitting on the far edge of the room. The silence that followed was heavy but not hostile. Just the crackle of the fire, the occasional clink of a spoon, and the relentless howl of the wind outside. Isla soon drifted into sleep, her head resting on Julian's lap. Amara stared into the flames, forcing herself to stay alert. "You don't have to be afraid," Julian said quietly. "I'm not afraid," she replied, though her voice still trembled slightly. "You're letting 2 strangers into your home. I'd say you're brave. Or maybe foolish," she smirked slightly. "I'd say the same to you," Julian chuckled, the first genuine warmth in his voice since he arrived. For the first time, the room felt less cold. "Come morning, the storm should ease." "Then you leave," she said firmly. Julian nodded. "One night. That's all we need." Amara looked at Isla's sleeping face, then back at Julian, holding her so gently. A flicker of warmth stirred within her, making her wonder if opening the door had been a mistake or perhaps the first right thing she had done in ages. The power had gone out completely. Amara lit 2 old candles, their flames trembling as she placed them on the table between her and Julian. Isla had only managed a few sips of soup before falling back to sleep. "She loves chicken noodle," Julian said after a long pause, nodding toward his daughter. He chuckled softly. "Sorry, habit. Her mother, she passed a few years ago, but every time I make chicken noodle soup for Isla, I always say it's because she would have, too." Amara glanced at the girl, her features softening. "She's sweet, polite." "I try," Julian said, then looked down. "She's all I've got." A vulnerability in his voice made Amara shift. Most men she had met carried secrets behind charm. Julian was just honest. "I'm sorry about her mother," Amara said gently. "Thank you," he replied. For a moment, their gazes met, a silent bridge forming between them. Amara stood up. "I have a clean blanket in the back. I'll grab it." In her linen closet, she hesitated before reaching for her softest blanket. A white quilt with tiny blue flowers, painstakingly hand-stitched by her grandmother. She rarely used it, keeping it folded neatly at the top of the stack. With a sigh, she took it down. When she returned, she stopped short in the doorway. Julian was seated on the floor beside Isla, who was moaning softly in her sleep. Unaware of Amara's presence, he dipped one of her clean white hand towels into a bowl of water, carefully wringing it out, then pressed the cool cloth gently to Isla's forehead, whispering words Amara couldn't make out. He rinsed the cloth, wiped Isla's cheeks, then folded it precisely and returned it to its spot in the kitchen, just as she kept her towels. He never saw her watching. Amara looked down at the quilt in her arms, then slowly stepped back into the room. "Here," she said gently, handing it over. Julian turned, slightly startled. "This is beautiful." "It's warm," she replied, "and clean." Their hands brushed as he took it. Amara sat back down by the fire, but this time a little closer. For the first time in a long time, the room felt full, not just of people, but of peace. As Julian settled beside his daughter, adjusting the blanket, he looked at Amara. "You didn't have to let us in," he said softly. "I know. You didn't have to feed us or offer your best blanket or pretend not to be scared." "I'm not pretending," she whispered. He smiled, faint but real. "Still," he said, "thank you for everything. I won't forget this night." Neither of them spoke again. The cabin glowed softly, and for one night, warmth won. The snow had not let up by morning, burying the world outside in a thick, white silence. Amara stepped onto the porch, wrapped in her thick coat, and stared at the sky. "They're saying the county might not plow the roads until tomorrow," she announced as she re-entered. Julian looked up from where he was feeding Isla soup. "Then we're stuck," she nodded. "Another night, at least." He met her eyes. "Sorry. It's not your fault," she said, though a touch of weariness lingered in her voice. "Let's make the best of it." That day, an unexpected rhythm settled upon them. Julian volunteered to chop firewood, swinging the axe with practiced force behind the cabin. Amara, surprised by his strength, watched from the window before turning back to the kitchen to make fresh biscuits and chicken soup. When a leak sprung near the back door, Julian patched it with tools from her old shed. He fixed a loose hinge on her bedroom door and reinforced a coat hook, smiling when Amara raised an eyebrow. "You're handy," she noted. "Years of fixing what I couldn't afford to replace," he replied. Isla's cough persisted. Amara didn't hesitate. She brewed ginger tea with honey, cooling it to a safe temperature and holding the cup for Isla to sip. She dampened a cloth, gently checking Isla's temperature. When Isla grew restless, Amara brought out a faded teddy bear, sitting beside her on the couch, whispering stories as she dabbed Isla's cheeks. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, smoothing her hair. "We're going to get you better." Julian watched from the kitchen, his jaw clenched. He was used to being both mother and father, protector and provider. Watching Amara tend to Isla with such tenderness stirred something deep within him. She had no obligation, no reason. Yet here she was, kneeling on the hardwood floor, humming softly as she cared for a child who wasn't hers. Later that afternoon, Julian watched Amara from the bedroom doorway. She was sitting on the floor next to Isla's bed, Isla's small hand cradled in hers. Amara was humming a lullaby, perhaps from her own childhood, her golden hair falling forward as she leaned over to press her hand to Isla's forehead. Every gesture was full of care, of presence. Julian's throat tightened. He turned away before she could see the way his eyes stung. That evening, as the wind howled outside and the cabin glowed with firelight, the three of them gathered in the living room. Amara told a fairy tale about a brave girl who tamed a snowstorm with kindness. Julian made clumsy but endearing animals out of paper scraps, making Isla giggle. Then Isla pulled out a small notebook and colored pencils Amara had given her, drawing furiously. When she finished, she tore out the page and held it up proudly. "This is you," she said, pointing to a golden-haired figure opening the door. The drawing was of a snow-covered cabin, a tall man and a small girl outside, and Amara opening the door, golden light spilling out behind her. Isla taped it to the wall. "This is my second home," she declared. Amara stared at the drawing, unable to speak. Julian looked at her, not with mere gratitude, but with something deeper. The way her fingers brushed Isla's hair, the warmth she poured into everything, her quiet strength. He smiled, and for the first time in a long, long time, he felt the fragile, frightening beginnings of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, hope. The storm had passed. The sun rose weakly behind clouds, casting a silver-gray sheen over the snow-drenched trees. Amara stood at the doorway of the cabin, dressed for work. The air was sharp with cold, but the roads might finally be plowed. Inside, Julian and Isla were still asleep on the couch. Amara hesitated. She wanted to say something, anything, ask if they would still be here when she got back, offer them another night. But the words felt heavy in her throat. This was her first shift in days, she couldn't afford to miss it. So she left, the fire stoked, extra wood by the hearth, and a small note on the kitchen counter, "Back by 4, make yourselves at home." By the time she reached the town's diner, where she worked part-time, her thoughts were consumed by them. Every time the bell above the front door jingled, she looked up, but it was never Julian, never Isla. When her shift ended, she practically ran to catch the shuttle back toward the mountain. The sky was turning orange by the time she made it to her cabin. The porch was quiet. No footprints in the fresh layer of snow. No giggles from inside. Her heart sank. She pushed the door open. The fire had burned low but was still alive. The blankets were folded neatly. The dishes in the sink were washed and drying. The room was clean, almost untouched. They were gone. A sharp ache bloomed in her chest. On the dining table lay a piece of folded paper, weighed down by something small and sleek. She approached slowly. The paper was cream-colored, faintly lined. There was no name on it, but she knew it was meant for her. She unfolded it. "Thank you for the warmth, for the kindness, for reminding me that people like you still exist in the world. I'll never forget it." There was no signature, just a line below, scrolled in softer, almost hesitant handwriting, "You helped more than you know." Beside the note sat a black card. No name, no bank name, just a single small chip and a strip of numbers. She picked it up, her heart thudding. It was heavier than a regular credit card, sleek, mysterious, a black card, the kind only the ultra-wealthy carried. She stared at it, stunned. Confusion flooded her first, then disbelief, then something she couldn't quite name. She set it down slowly and sat on the edge of the couch where Julian had sat the night before, telling stories to his daughter. Her fingers tightened around the note. He was gone without a goodbye, without an explanation, without her getting to say what had begun to build inside her chest. She hadn't expected it to hurt like this. She thought she would feel relief, space to breathe, her house returned to her. Instead, she felt a hollow throb, like someone had opened a door in her heart and slipped away before she knew they had entered. Her eyes burned. The cabin was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, Amara cried, not from fear, not from pain, but from the ache of missing something she hadn't expected to find, and not knowing if she would ever see it again. The next morning, Amara stood in line at the only bank in town, the mysterious black card clutched tightly in her coat pocket. Her breath fogged up the glass doors as she waited. Her mind waged war, one side screaming to use it, the other holding fast to the one thing she had always clung to, pride. When her number was called, she approached the desk with hesitant steps. "I found this," she said, placing the card gently on the counter. "I just want to know who it belongs to." The teller gave her a strange look but typed in a few digits. After a few seconds, her eyebrows lifted. "This is a private account," the woman said carefully. "No name attached publicly. High-tier status. I can't disclose details, but whoever gave you this must trust you very much." "I don't want the money," Amara said quickly. "I'm not here to use it. I just needed to know." The woman nodded slowly and slid the card back across the counter. Amara left with more questions than answers, tucking the card away in a drawer, unopened, untouched. Days turned to weeks. Snow began to melt. Amara went back to her routine, patching up the cabin, working at the library 2 days a week, taking extra shifts at the diner. But everything felt dimmer. The echo of laughter from that stormy night stayed with her, as did the image of Julian sitting by the fire, making paper animals for his daughter. She found herself waking in the middle of the night, staring at the door, half expecting to hear a knock. Then one Monday morning, everything unraveled. She arrived at the small town library only to find a sign taped to the door, "Closed indefinitely, funding eliminated." Inside, her supervisor was boxing up the last of the books. "I'm so sorry, Amara," the woman said. "They pulled the plug on rural locations. There's nothing we can do." Amara walked home that day with numb legs, every step heavier than the last. 2 jobs gone in under 3 months. No family, no backup. Bills were piling up. By the end of the week, her woodpile was dwindling, the refrigerator half empty, her savings account dipped below $20. The silence in the cabin grew heavier with every passing day. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, slipped under her door in a thick cream envelope. Her name was written by hand in elegant, deliberate strokes. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single page printed on fine letterhead. Dear Miss Amara Thompson, we are pleased to invite you to a private interview for the newly established community outreach program within Thorn Enterprises. We are seeking individuals of rare character, strong values, and demonstrated compassion. Your name was personally recommended. Please arrive at our downtown office at the time below. Travel arrangements have been made on your behalf. Sincerely, Julian Thorn, Chief Executive Officer, Thorn Enterprises. Her hands trembled. She read it again and again. Julian. She sat down hard on the edge of the couch, the same spot where he had once sat beside Isla. She pressed the letter to her chest, breathing deeply. He remembered, and he had found her. She didn't know what this interview was, why now, or why, after all this time, he had reached out. But one thing was certain, her story with Julian was not over yet. Amara stood in the lobby of the gleaming glass building, the polished marble floors reflecting her boots, still speckled with mud from the mountain road. The ceiling stretched high above her, trimmed with golden light, and the people around her moved with quiet purpose in sleek suits and crisp heels. She felt like a stranger in a foreign land, clutching the invitation letter in one hand. She approached the receptionist. I have an appointment with Thorn Enterprises. My name is Amara Thompson. The woman smiled warmly. Yes, we've been expecting you. Please take the elevator to the 32nd floor. Mr. Thorn will meet you there personally. Amara blinked. Mr. Thorn? Yes, the receptionist said. He's the CEO. She stepped into the elevator, her heart pounding. The number above the doors ticked upward. Each floor brought back a memory, Isla giggling beside the fire, Julian handing her soup, his voice thanking her in the quiet of a snow-covered night. When the doors slid open, the space before her was quiet, elegant. A woman in a navy dress gestured politely and led her to a large glass-walled office. And there he was. Julian stood near the window, tall and composed in a charcoal suit. His back was to her, but as she stepped in, he turned. Their eyes met. Time, for a moment, paused. He smiled, warm, steady, familiar. Amara, he said softly. She took a breath. Julian. He stepped forward, hands relaxed at his sides. He looked the same but different, stronger somehow, more in control, but with the same quiet kindness in his eyes. I was wondering if you'd come, he said. You invited me, she replied, her voice soft. I hoped you'd say yes, he said gently, then gestured to the small sitting area. Please, sit. She lowered herself into the armchair. He walked to a nearby shelf, pulled out a flat folder, and handed it to her. Inside was a single piece of paper, a child's drawing, the cabin in the snow, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman opening the door. Her eyes widened. You kept it, she whispered. I took it, Julian admitted. That morning. I knew Isla would want me to. She called you our angel that night. I wanted to keep a piece of what that night meant. She looked up at him. Julian sat across from her now, leaning forward. I didn't tell you who I was. I didn't plan to show up that night, but I've spent the month since trying to figure out how to repay something that can't be repaid. Amara shook her head slowly. I didn't do anything extraordinary. You gave us shelter, dignity. You gave Isla warmth and safety when we had neither. And you gave me something I thought I'd lost for good. He paused. Hope, he continued, his voice steady. I used to think the only way to build something lasting was through power, control. But you reminded me what real strength looks like, quiet, brave, kind. I created a program, community outreach, education, rural aid, all of it rooted in that one night. He stood and walked to his desk, retrieving another folder. And I want you to lead it. Amara blinked. Me? He nodded. You've lived it. You understand what it means to give without expecting anything back. That's the kind of leadership I want. She looked down at the folder in her lap, then back at him. Her voice trembled. This isn't about money, is it? Julian smiled. No, it never was. Amara looked at this man who had once sat beside a fire in worn boots and flannel, who had now offered her not just a job, but a place in the story he was still writing. She nodded. I'll do it, she said, not for the title, not for the office, but because in his eyes she saw something she hadn't seen in her own reflection for a long time: purpose. And because she believed him, not just as a CEO, but as the man who had once whispered, "Thank you," in the dark and meant every word. Amara's first day at Vanguard Solutions felt like stepping into another world, a world where everything gleamed too brightly, where money smelled like freshly polished marble, and the air was thick with power. She walked into the towering glass building in a department store blazer and thrifted heels, feeling every pair of eyes snap toward her the moment she crossed the lobby. It wasn't curiosity, it was evaluation, calculation, judgment. She kept her head high, shoulders squared. She had worked in places where people underestimated her before. She knew how to hold her ground. Julian was waiting in his office, a sprawling, sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Vidya City. His desk was so pristine it looked more like an art piece than something actually used for work. He didn't look up when she walked in, just gestured toward the chair across from him. "You're late," he stated. Amara arched a brow. "By 2 minutes." Julian finally looked at her, his sharp gray eyes fixed on hers. "That's 2 minutes I don't get back." Amara exhaled, shaking her head. She had barely been there 5 seconds, and he was already starting. "Look, do you want me here or not?" He leaned back, studying her. "That remains to be seen." Before she could fire back, the glass door opened, and Vera, Julian's assistant, walked in, a tablet in hand. Her expression was unreadable, but Amara didn't miss the way the woman's gaze flickered over her, as if assessing whether or not she belonged here. Spoiler alert, Vera had already decided she didn't. "Miss Thompson," Vera said smoothly, "welcome to Vanguard Solutions." Amara met her gaze head-on, a slow smile curling her lip. "Oh, we're doing last names. All right, good to see you again, Miss Winters." Something in Vera's eyes flickered just for a second before she turned her attention back to Julian. "I've prepared the reports for the upcoming negotiations with the Aurelian Group," she said, handing him the tablet. "Would you like me to brief her on company protocols?" Julian didn't even look up. "No, I will." Amara wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a warning. Vera only nodded, but before she left, she hesitated slightly at the door, glancing back at Amara once more. "Good luck," she murmured. Amara tilted her head. The way she said it didn't sound like encouragement, it sounded like a warning. She didn't have much time to think about it before Julian was already diving into work, no small talk, no settling in. He pulled up a file, sliding it across the table. "Aurelian Group," he said. "They want to push through a contract that would cut labor costs by outsourcing jobs overseas. That means layoffs, thousands." Amara skimmed the file, her stomach churning. "And you want me to what? Convince them not to?" Julian's gaze didn't waver. "I want you to do what you do best, read people." Amara sat back, crossing her arms. "So, let me get this straight. You brought me in because you think I can charm my way into getting these billionaires to grow a conscience?" Julian didn't blink. "No, I brought you in because I think you understand something they don't." Amara narrowed her eyes. "And what's that?" He leaned forward slightly. "That people who have nothing to lose fight the hardest." The words hit something deep in her ribs, something unspoken but true. She stared at him for a long moment, then exhaled, shaking her head. "You know, you talk in riddles a lot for someone who runs a tech empire." For the first time, the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. And then, just like that, the moment passed. "Meetings at noon," he said, standing. "Try not to be late." Amara rolled her eyes but didn't argue. She had a job to do. The conference room was colder than the rest of the building, all steel and glass, like it had been designed to make people uncomfortable. Amara sat beside Julian at the long mahogany table, facing three men in tailored suits, each one radiating the kind of confidence that came from knowing they could buy and sell entire lives with a single stroke of a pen. The leader of the group, Richard Vance, a man in his 60s with slick-back white hair and an air of inherited arrogance, barely even looked at her. Amara had dealt with men like him before, the ones who only saw value in people who looked like them. She didn't let it show. Julian opened the conversation, cutting straight to the point. "You want to move production to Taiwan. You say it'll save costs, increase efficiency." He paused. "I say it'll destroy a workforce that's built this company's infrastructure for over a decade." Vance gave a slow, thin-lipped smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "You misunderstand, Julian. It's not personal. It's just business." Amara's fingers curled beneath the table. Not personal. She had heard that phrase too many times in her life, when her landlord raised rent overnight because developers wanted to revitalize the neighborhood, when her mother lost her job at the textile plant because they found cheaper labor overseas, when companies like this shut down communities and called it strategy. She smiled, but there was steel in it. "Funny," she said, tilting her head, "because it's always just business until it's your job on the line." Vance's eyes snapped to her for the first time. Julian didn't interrupt, he just watched. Vance exhaled sharply through his nose, like he had better things to do than entertain the help. "And you are?" Amara didn't blink. "Amara Thompson, Vanguard Solutions." He gave her a once-over, and she saw the exact moment he dismissed her. She didn't care. She had been underestimated before. Vance leaned back in his chair, waving a hand. "Look, sweetheart, I get it. You think we're the villains here, but this is about numbers. It's about what makes the most sense." "Sweetheart." Amara's jaw locked. She leaned forward, matching his posture. "All right," she said coolly. "Let's talk numbers." She slid a document across the table. "This is a breakdown of what happens when you offshore production. Sure, you cut costs at first, but in 3 years, when labor demands rise, your new manufacturing hub gets expensive. You'll spend millions restructuring, rehiring, and dealing with PR disasters when the headlines read, 'American workers betrayed for profit.'" She tapped the paper. "That's not a guess. That's market analysis." Vance glanced at the file but didn't touch it. Amara held his gaze, didn't blink, didn't flinch. "You can make the smart choice now," she said, her voice calm, deadly, "or you can explain to your investors why your short-term gains just cost them their long-term returns." Silence stretched. Then, finally, Vance exhaled, picked up the paper, and scanned it. Julian didn't smile, but Amara could feel the shift in the room. She had just changed the game. Vance set the document down, his expression unreadable. "We'll revisit the proposal," he said. Julian nodded. "See that you do." The meeting ended shortly after as Vance and his associates left. Amara felt the weight of Julian's gaze on her. She turned to him. "Well?" Julian studied her for a long moment, then said, "I knew I hired you for a reason." Amara smirked. "Damn right you did." And for the first time since she walked into Vanguard Solutions, she felt like she belonged. 2 months in, Amara had found her rhythm at Vanguard Solutions, or at least she thought she had. She had learned how to navigate the halls of power, how to stand her ground in a world that barely acknowledged her existence. She had faced down Richard Vance and walked out victorious. She had proved to Julian and to herself that she wasn't just here as a symbolic gesture, a corporate pet project. She was here because she belonged. But victories at the top were short-lived, because now the company was in trouble. Amara was in trouble, and someone had just set her up to take the fall. She had just come back from a client meeting when Vera caught her in the hallway. "We have a problem," Vera said, her tone sharp, urgent. Amara frowned. "Define problem." Vera didn't answer. She just handed Amara a printed email. Amara's stomach sank the second she saw the contents. It was a company report, classified financial data. It had been leaked to the press, and the email forwarding it had Amara's name on it. The words blurred. The air in the room shifted, turned dense, heavy. She forced herself to breathe. "This isn't mine." "I know," Vera said. "But someone wants it to be." Amara's pulse thundered. She had been in enough situations like this to know how fast they spiraled. A black woman in a powerful white space didn't get the benefit of the doubt. She didn't get to be innocent until proven guilty. She was guilty the second they said she was. She gripped the paper, scanning it again. "Who else has seen this?" "Julian," Vera said. "And the board." Amara's breath hitched. The board. She had barely clawed her way into this company, and now they were about to rip her out. Julian's office was colder than usual, or maybe it was just the way he was looking at her. His hands were clasped on his desk, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, those sharp gray eyes, were studying her, weighing her. Amara felt something clench in her chest. "Tell me I wasn't wrong," he said, low, controlled. Amara slammed the email onto his desk. "This isn't me." Julian didn't look at the paper. He didn't need to. "I want to believe that," he said, his voice steady. "But this is a serious leak, Amara. Millions in exposure, stock drops, investigations. You understand how bad this is?" Amara leaned forward, hands planted on his desk. "I understand perfectly. I also understand that whoever did this knows exactly what they're doing. I was the easy target, right? The outsider, the black woman with too much confidence. Who's going to believe me over some executive who's been here for 10 years? Julian didn't flinch, but he didn't disagree either. The silence stretched too long. Amara's nails dug into her palms. "Do you think I did this?" Julian held her gaze. No, the breath she had been holding finally released, but he continued. "The board does." Amara swore under her breath, pacing. She could feel the noose tightening. "So what happens now?" she asked, forcing the words out. Julian exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "We find the real leak." Amara froze. "We?" "Not you, not me. We." For the first time since she walked in, the ice in her chest cracked. Julian stood, slipping his suit jacket back on. Vera is already running a trace on the email source, but it was routed through an external server. Someone covered their tracks well, he met her gaze. "We'll have to be smarter." Amara crossed her arms, leveling him with a look. "And what if we don't find them in time? What if the board decides to cut me loose?" Julian's jaw tightened. "Then we make them regret it." Amara studied him. Julian Thorne was not the kind of man who made promises, but for the first time, she believed him. Whoever had set her up was about to find out exactly what kind of fight they had just started. The truth unraveled faster than they expected. Amara and Vera worked through the night, combing through server logs, tracing digital breadcrumbs. Whoever had framed her had been careful, but not careful enough. The leak had been routed through a secondary account, one tied to Marcus Stone, a senior executive with 10 years at Vanguard Solutions and a reputation for keeping his hands clean while letting others do his dirty work. By morning, they had enough evidence to bury him. Amara stormed into the boardroom before they could summon her like a criminal. The air was thick with tension, dozens of polished, powerful men in tailored suits staring her down like she was already gone. Julian sat at the head of the table, unreadable. Miss Thompson, one of the board members, an older man with a thin-lipped smirk, gestured to the empty seat across from them. I assume you know why you're here. Amara didn't sit. She never planned to. I do, she said, her voice steady. And I assume you all know you're about to make a very expensive mistake. A flicker of amusement crossed Julian's face, but he didn't interfere. Miss Thompson, the board member started, but she cut him off. I was an easy target, right? She said, pacing. The new hire, the outsider, the one you could pin this on and sweep under the rug. She stopped, placing a thick folder on the table. Except you picked the wrong one. She slid the folder toward them. Silence stretched as they skimmed the documents, their expressions shifting from dismissive to something closer to alarm. Marcus Stone sat 2 seats down, his face paling by the second. These are traced emails, Amara continued, bank transfers, call logs with reporters, all of them linked to Stone. Not me. She crossed her arms. And before you ask, yes, our legal team already has copies, and so does the press. So if you want to talk about damage control, I'd start there. A murmur swept through the room. Stone shot to his feet, his voice a little too sharp, too desperate. This is ridiculous. She's bluffing. Amara turned to Julian, lifting a brow. Am I? Julian finally spoke, his voice as sharp as cut glass. No, she's not. The words landed like a blow. Stone's mouth snapped shut. Julian stood, adjusting his cufflinks. Effective immediately, Marcus Stone is terminated. Full legal action will be pursued. He let the weight of his words settle before turning his attention to the rest of the room. And if anyone else in this company thinks they can play the same game, let this serve as a warning. The silence that followed was absolute. Amara didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had won. 2 weeks later, she stood beside Julian at Isla's graduation. The girl grinned up at her from her wheelchair, holding her diploma like it was the greatest prize in the world. I told you I'd make it, she said, chest puffed out. Amara laughed, ruffling her hair. Never doubted it for a second. Julian watched them, his usual cool exterior softer somehow. You did good, Thompson, he said. She smirked. Damn right I did. Isla glanced between them. Are you guys going to hug or something? Julian sighed. Absolutely not. Amara rolled her eyes. God, no. Isla just grinned. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt like she had built something real, something that mattered, and she wasn't done yet. Years later, Amara Thompson sat in the executive office of Vanguard Solutions, her name now engraved on the door as Vice President of Corporate Strategy. What had started as a job, a challenge, had become a mission. Under her leadership, the company expanded its ethical labor initiatives, launched mentorship programs, and built partnerships with minority-owned businesses. Across town, a new community center bore the name Carter Thorne Foundation, funding education and job opportunities for underserved youth. At its ribbon-cutting ceremony, Isla, now a college freshman, stood beside her, grinning like the child who once got a free meal in a cabin because of kindness. That was the kind of investment that always paid off. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.